Hello, I'm Patrick McGuire once again, and I want to thank you for joining us in this series of Overcoming the Paradigms of Christianity. Now, in this segment, we've been looking at the holidays of Christianity versus the holy days or appointed times of Yahweh. And we left off last time studying good old Santa Claus, and we're going to find out where Santa Claus came from. We found out he did not come from some 4th century saint or whatever, because it's doubtful that this alleged saint ever existed. So let's look at some research that's been done. The text states that some Santa researchers associate Santa with the Norse god of Odin or Woden. Crichton describes Odin as riding through the sky on an 8-legged white horse named Sleipnir. Santa originally had 8 reindeers, Rudolph being the 9th. Odin lived in Valhalla, the north, and had a long white beard. Odin would fly through the sky during the winter solstice, December 21st through the 25th, rewarding the good children and punishing the naughty. That came from Robin Crichton's book, Who is Santa Claus? The Truth Behind a Living Legend from 1987. Mythologist Helene Adeline Gerber presents a very convincing case tracing Santa to the Norse god Thor in Myths of Northern Lands. Thor was the god of the peasants and the common people. He was represented as an elderly man, jovial and friendly, of heavy build with a long white beard. His element was the fire, his color red. The rumble and roar of thunder were said to be caused by the rolling of his chariot, for he alone among the gods never rode on horseback, but drove in a chariot drawn by 2 white goats called Cracker and Nasher. He was fighting the giants of ice and snow, and thus became the Yule god. He was said to live in the Northland, where he had his palace among icebergs. By our pagan forefathers, he was considered as the cheerful and friendly god, never harming the humans, but rather helping and protecting them. The fireplace in every home was especially sacred to him, and he was said to have come down through the chimney into his element, the fire. That comes from Gerber's book, Myths of Northern Lands, from 1895. Now, the unusual and common characteristics of Santa and Thor are too close to ignore. We're looking at an elderly man, jovial and friendly and of heavy build with a long white beard. His element was the fire, and his color red. Drove a chariot drawn by 2 white goats named Cracker and Nasher. He was the Yule god. Yule is Christmas time. He lived in the Northland, the North Pole. He was considered the cheerful and friendly god. He was benevolent to humans. The fireplace was especially sacred to him. He came down through the chimney into his element, the fire. So to say that that's merely a coincidence that the tales of the false gods of the past match up so close with Santa Claus, and that we adopt this Santa Claus character while allegedly rejecting the false gods of other people is rather hypocritical. Now, even today in Sweden, Thor represents Santa Claus. The book, The Story of Christmas Symbols, records this. Swedish children wait eagerly for Jultomten, a gnome whose sleigh is drawn by the Julbacher, the goats of the thunder god Thor. With his red suit and cap and a bulging sack on his back, he looks much like the American Santa Claus. That comes from Holly Reindeer and Colored Lights, The Story of Christmas Symbols. Thor was probably history's most celebrated and worshipped pagan god. His widespread influence is particularly obvious in the 5th day of the week, which is named after him, Thursday, which is actually Thor's day. And we're talking about Odin, that Santa Claus is modeled after Odin. Now, his name was actually Woden, and we named Woden's day after him, being Wednesday. Now, it's ironic that Thor's symbol was a hammer. A hammer is also the symbolic tool of the carpenter, Santa Claus. It's also worth mentioning that Thor's helpers were elves, and like Santa Claus elves, Thor's elves were skilled craftsmen. It was the elves who created Thor's alleged magic hammer. In the Handbook of Christian Feasts and Customs, author Francis Weiser traces the origin of Santa to Thor, saying behind the name Santa Claus actually stands the figure of the pagan Germanic god Thor. That was written in 1952. After listing some of the common attributes of Thor and Santa, Weiser concludes, here Thor, then, is the true origin of our Santa Claus. With the Christian saint whose name he still bears, however, this Santa Claus has really nothing to do. Another interesting trait of Thor is recorded by H.R. Ellis Davidson in Scandinavian mythology. It was Thor who, in the last days of heathenism, was regarded as the chief antagonist of Christ. In case you are not aware, an antagonist is an enemy, adversary, or replacement. Why do parents want their children to sit in Santa's lap? It imitates the worst of pagan rituals. It symbolizes the child sacrifice to the god Moloch. Moloch was a sitting iron statue that would be heated with fire inside it until it was red hot. Then the child would be placed on the arms and lap of the god as a sacrificial appeasement. And that illustration that we're showing there comes from the JewishEncyclopedia.com and comes from an ancient script that was found many, many centuries ago. Now, I used to have an office in the mall, and I would look down and watch the lines of people that would be waiting for their kids to be placed in Santa Claus' lap, and it looks pathetic. It is a picture of child sacrifice to the god Moloch. And if you look at some of the graphics that are shown, we have the one cartoon of the kid crying, the smartest one of the bunch. Now let's look at this passage again in Deuteronomy 12, starting at verse 29. When Yahweh your Elohim cuts off before you the nations which you are going in to dispossess, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, beware that you're not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods, that I also may do likewise? You cannot behave thus toward Yahweh your Elohim, for every abominable act which Yahweh hates they have done for their gods, for they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Once again, when we have this portrayal of well, I'm not worshiping false gods. I'm just doing this for fun, for the kids. For every kid wants to experience Christmas. We don't want to take away my kids' Christmases. They mean so much to them. And why does it mean so much to them? Why do you think it means so much to them? Because you lavish them with a bunch of stupid toys and gifts that they don't need. And you save it up for that time of the year to do it. I would bet that most people even go real light on the birthday so they can really load up on Christmas and really get that Christmas spirit going. Christmas spirit is very real. It's a very real thing. It's just not a real good thing. It's a real bad thing. Well, I mean, is it okay to exchange gifts on Christmas? After all, the three wise men exchanged gifts on Jesus' birthday. I've heard that before. Have you heard that? Well, the wise men brought gifts to acknowledge Yeshua as king. They weren't birthday presents. This was a common practice for foreign visitors to bring a king gifts of gold and spices. For instance, the Queen of Sheba brought these same gifts to Solomon when she visited. Look in 1 Kings 10, verse 10. And she, being the Queen of Sheba, gave the king 120 talents of gold, and a very great amount of spices and precious stones. Never again did such abundance of spices come in as that which the Queen of Sheba gave King Solomon. Now in pagan Rome, the celebration of the winter solstice began on December 17th with the Feast of Saturn, also called the Saturnalia. Through December 23rd, the Roman world engaged in merrymaking and the exchanging of gifts in honor of Saturn, the god of sowing and husbandry, and according to the Rosicrucian source, to commemorate the future golden age of Saturn, where it says, here is the general reformation of the world announced in the Rosicrucian manifestos described as a world reformation. Whilst involving definite reforms in education, church, and law, this general reformation has millenarian overtones. It will bring the world back to the state in which Adam found it, which was also Saturn's golden age. So in the Confessio, the second Rosicrucian manifesto, the General Reformation is said to presage a great influx of truth and light. such as surround Adam in paradise, and which God will allow before the end of the world. This millennium, this return to the golden age of Adam and Saturn, is said to be assisted by the high society of the Rosicrucians. And that's by Francis Yates, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, more Christmas nonsense, more of the basic foundations of where Christmas came from. The Bibliotheca Sacra states, the interchange of presents between friends is a like characteristic of Christmas and Saturnalia, and must have been adopted by Christians from the pagans. As the admonition of Tertullian plainly states, by us who are strangers to Sabbaths and new moons and festivals once acceptable to Yahweh, the Saturnalia, the feasts of January, the Brumalia, and the Matronalia are now frequented. Gifts are carried to and fro. New Year's Day presents are made with din, and sports and banquets are celebrated with an uproar, written by Tertullian in 230 A.D. And the question always comes up too, what? You mean you don't celebrate Christmas? Well, that's weird. Strange or foreign. I would never give up my Christmas. I've heard that many, many times. Well, 1 John 3 verse 1 says, see how great a love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called children of Elohim, and such we are. For this reason, the world does not know us, because it did not know him. If people can see in Scripture that such things as Christmas are forbidden, pagan, idolatrous abominations, if they see this in Scripture that that's what it is, and they still go to it, they do not know the Father, and the Father does not know them. John 15, starting at verse 18, says, if the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own, being Christmas. But you're not of the world. But I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. People say, well, Christmas, that's about Jesus. No, it's not. It's about Walmart. It's about a pagan festival that has been mustered up to boost our economy at the end of the year. It's plastered. It's made our economy to be really based upon paganism itself. Matthew 13, starting at verse 40, says, therefore, just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. In that place there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, I've seen Christians now, and I've read a lot on this, Christians defending Christmas as to why they do it. Now, with the scriptures you've seen, let me read to you a defense, a Christian defense of the celebration of Christmas. This comes from the Christianity Today library at ctlibrary.com, where a question someone wrote in said, a friend says her church doesn't celebrate Christmas because it began as a pagan holiday. Why then do most churches celebrate Christmas? From Brian Smith via the internet. Here's the answer from Christianity Today library. Answer: was the event we now call Christmas originally a pagan holiday? In some ways. Does that mean the church should discard it along with its lights, tinsel, and increasing commercialism? Only if we're prepared to abandon many other holidays and common Christian practices that the early church co-opted for its own purpose of glorifying Christ. Yes, they did. They did adopt many pagan customs in order to, but it wasn't to glorify Christ. They did it in order to bring the pagans in. They adopted the pagan customs in order to grow their numbers. He continued, Christmas has its origins in the 4th century. December 25th, which Christians now herald as Jesus' birthday, was actually the date on which the Romans celebrated the birth of the sun god. After the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity at the Milvian Bridge in 312, allegedly converted, he sought to combine the worship of the sun god with the worship of Christ. Christian leaders accepted Constantine's conversion in a positive light and saw the Christ Mass celebration as a vital part of the process of converting the pagan world. Long before Constantine, Christians found ways to redeem local cultures and salvage elements in those cultures that naturally pointed to Christ. Whether Hebrew, Syrian, Greek, or Roman, they denounced the inhuman pagan practices, but at the same time took over pagan temples and converted them to churches. They replaced the old gods in popular devotion with heroic martyrs of the persecutions, and they replaced the holy days of paganism with the festivals of the Christian year, etc., etc., etc. So the defense of observing Christmas is it's okay to adopt the pagan things, just don't sacrifice your children anymore. Don't use different names. Don't use the names of the pagan gods. Use names of heroic Christian martyrs of days gone by, but do the same things. What did we just read? Deuteronomy 12, starting in verse 1, says, "These are the statutes and judgments which you shall be careful to observe in the land which Yahweh, Elohim of your fathers, is giving you to possess. All the days that you live on the earth, you shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations which you shall dispossess serve their gods. Destroy them on the high mountains, on the hills, under every green tree. You shall destroy their altars, break down their pillars, burn their wooden images with fire, cut down the carved images of their gods, and destroy their names from that place. You shall not worship Yahweh your Elohim with such things." It's not difficult to understand. It's very, very, very plain. Those of you who are married, I'm going to use that same example again. How much of your old boyfriend's or girlfriend's stuff does your spouse want laying around? How often do they want them visiting? How much devotion does your spouse want you to show toward your old boyfriends or girlfriends? Just how much? How about none? See, this points to, Elohim says his very name is jealous. And we get this word jealous so confused. People confuse. They think jealousy is a bad thing. Jealousy is a good thing. Jealousy is protection of that which is yours. Coveting is entirely different. Coveting is desiring something that does not belong to you. Jealousy is protecting that which is yours. And I would easily go this far: if a man is not jealous of his wife and wants to protect her from other men, if he doesn't get jealous, he doesn't love her. Continuing once again, we're going to read this Deuteronomy 12 thing one more time, and if it's hard to understand, email me, call me, okay? This is not difficult to understand. "Observe and obey all these words which I command you, that it may go well with you and your children after you forever, when you do what is good and right in the sight of Yahweh your Elohim. When Yahweh your Elohim cuts off from before you the nations which you go to dispossess, and you displace them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you're not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, 'How did these nations serve their gods? I also will do likewise.' You shall not worship Yahweh your Elohim in that way. For every abomination to Yahweh which he hates they've done to their gods, for they burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods." You want to celebrate Christmas, you know what God sees? You know what Elohim looks down and sees? He sees children that were sacrificed. That's what he sees. He wants no part of it. That's what he says he sees. And he finishes that chapter, "Whatever I command you, be careful to observe it. You shall not add to it or take away from it." What do you have to add to God's word or take away from it? Let's look at another lovely, lovely holiday. Let's look at the origins of Easter. This is a little shorter. You'll get the idea. First of all, the origin of the name of Easter. The English word Easter and the German Ostern come from a common origin being Easter, Aster, Ostara, Ostar, which to the Norsemen meant the season of the rising or growing sun, the season of new birth. The word used by our ancestors to designate the feast of new life in the spring. The same root is found in the name for the place where the sun rises, East or Ost. The word Easter then originally meant the celebrating of the spring sun, which had its birth in the east and brought new life upon the earth. This symbolism was transferred to the supernatural meaning of our Easter, to the new life of the risen Christ, the eternal and uncreated light, Based on a passage in the writings of Saint Bede the Venerable, the term Easter has often been explained as the name of an Anglo-Saxon goddess, Eostre, although no such goddess is known in the mythologies of any Germanic tribe. Modern research has made it quite clear that Saint Bede erroneously interpreted the name of the season as that of the goddess. That comes from the Handbook of Christian Feasts and Customs in 1952. Well, what means the term Easter itself? It's not a Christian name per se. It bears the Chaldean origin on its very forehead. Easter is nothing else than Astarte, one of the titles of Beltis, the Queen of Heaven, whose name, as pronounced by the people of Nineveh, was evidently identical with that now in common use in this country. That name, as found by Layard on the Assyrian monuments, is Ishtar. That comes from the book The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. The 11th edition of Encyclopedia Britannica's Easter article states, "There is no indication of the observance of the Easter festival in the New Testament or in the writings of the Apostolic Church Fathers." The ecclesiastical historian Socrates is quoted in the same article as he points out that neither the Lord nor his apostles enjoined the keeping of this day. He says the apostles had no thought of appointing festival days, but of promoting a life of blamelessness and piety. He attributes the observance of Easter by the church to the perpetuation of an old usage, just as many other customs have been established. Early church reformers such as Calvin and Knox protested strongly against Easter because of its pagan origins. Observance of the holiday was not widely celebrated in America until well after the Civil War. That comes from Easter, its Story and Meaning by Alan Watts, and also Calvin's tracts and Knox's History. Easter has long been known to be a pagan festival. America's founders knew this. A children's book about the holiday, Easter Parade, Welcome Sweet Springtime by Steve Englehart, states, "When the Puritans came to North America, they regarded the celebration of Easter and the celebration of Christmas with suspicion. They knew that pagans had celebrated the return of spring long before Christians celebrated Easter. For the first 200 years of European life in North America, only a few states, mostly in the South, paid much attention to Easter. Not until after the Civil War did Americans begin celebrating this holiday. Easter first became an American tradition in the 1870s. Ashtaroth, the Queen of Heaven. Now, Astarte, or Easter worship, was always associated with the worship of Baal or sun worship. Astarte was Baal's wife. Now, no name could more exactly picture forth the characteristic of Semiramis as Queen of Babylon than the name of Ashtart, for that justly means the woman that made towers. Ashtoreth, then, is obviously the same as the Hebrew Ashtoreth, once again from Alexander Hislop's book, The Two Babylons. Microsoft Encarta Multimedia Encyclopedia says, Ishtar was the great mother, the goddess of fertility, and the queen of heaven. Many ancient historians attest that Ashtaroth or Ishtar was Nimrod's harlotress, mother or wife, widow Semiramis. Easter is historically established as Ashtaroth of the Scriptures. Elohim views the worship of this pagan goddess as evil by any name. Look in Judges 2, starting at verse 11. Then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of Yahweh and served the Baals. And they forsook Yahweh, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked Yahweh to anger. They provoked Yahweh to anger by doing this. It says in verse 13, and they forsook Yahweh and served the Baal and the Ashtaroth. Now, I've heard the excuse by many saying that I'm not, okay, I'll celebrate these things that have pagan origins, but I'm not doing it for pagan purposes. I'm doing it for Elohim. And you may not like the way I'm doing it, but he understands, okay? He knows my heart. Well, I have news for you. He doesn't understand because he tells you specifically not to do that. And I have heard the excuse, people saying that, I don't do this golden calf type of stuff. Well, yes, you are doing the golden calf type of stuff. Let's take a look at exactly what happened here, which is often misconstrued by most Christian Bible teachers and by almost everyone sitting in the pews on Sunday mornings. Exodus 32, starting at verse 3, which is the golden calf episode, it says, Then all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." What they did, they made an image or a mediator to Elohim is what they did. Look at how this is worded as it goes. Verse 5, "Now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation saying, 'Tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh.'" So Aaron is starting a new feast day to use the mediator of the golden calf to get to Yahweh. That is what he hates. You can't add to his word or delete from it. They tried to make a new feast day for this. So the next day they rose early and burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. They did it. They were doing the peace offerings and burnt offerings that were commanded, but they weren't doing them in the way that Elohim commanded. They were supposed to do it only at that altar and only to him in his presence in the place he designates, not any place that they want to do it and through any mechanism like a mediator of a golden calf. That is the problem with the argument of, I don't celebrate the pagan holidays. I'm doing it for God. It doesn't work. He doesn't like it. He hates it. It's an abomination. 1 Samuel 7, starting at verse 3, says, "Then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, 'If you return to Yahweh with all your heart, remove the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your hearts to Yahweh and serve him alone, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines.' So the sons of Israel removed the Baals and the Ashtaroth and served Yahweh alone." Let's look at Easter eggs. That's a sacred symbol of rebirth and fertility among the Babylonians, Druids, Egyptians, and other pagan cultures. Dyed eggs were used as sacred offerings during the pagan Easter season and were also used as symbols of the goddess Ostar or Ishtar in various cultures. That comes from the Encyclopedia Britannica. During the rule of Caesar Augustus, Hyginus, an Egyptian who was the librarian at the Palatine Library in Rome, wrote, "An egg of a wondrous sight is said to have fallen from the heaven into the river Euphrates. The fishes rolled it to the bank where the doves, having settled upon it and hatched it, out came Venus, who afterwards was the Syrian goddess Astarte. Part of their worship to this goddess was the ritual involving the golden egg of Astarte. This was where we got the tradition of the Easter egg. We have the rabbit. It's actually a hare. Instead of a rabbit, it's a pagan symbol of fertility and new life. That comes from the Handbook of Christian Feasts and Customs. Bede, the 8th century English monk and scholar, related that the Teutonic goddess of spring and fertility, Easter, had the hare as her symbol. The Easter rabbit lays the eggs, for which reason they're hidden in a nest or in the garden. The rabbit is a pagan symbol and has always been an emblem of fertility. And then one more thing I'd like to mention, if you're still unsure as to the rabbit being used as a method of sexual symbolism, then I suggest you ask Hugh Hefner, the publisher of Playboy magazine, why he uses a bunny as his main logo. That is indeed a good question. We also have the Easter ham, which unfortunately, we're running out of time now, and we will pick up right where we left off. We'll finish talking about Easter, then we'll look at the holy days or appointed days of Yahweh. Thank you very much for joining us, and may Elohim greatly bless you.